All right. Hello, everybody. I am going to be going through a couple of PowerPoints. We're going to start with the biodiversity one. There were some questions about this stuff, and we didn't effectively go over it, and I apologize. That's my fault. So we're going to kind of go through and take a look at the different soil biodiversity stuff through this PowerPoint, and then we'll do the second one here in a moment. But when we talk about soil biodiversity, the idea behind this presentation, the idea behind this experiment, was to recognize the differences in the biodiversity of different various environments. Yes, we understand that it's all soil, but we wanted to kind of try and understand that there's a difference in what lives in different areas of soil, just as we didn't take a look at, but there would be a difference in how much what's in the soil of a crop field versus your lawn. So we just kind of took the three things that we had close to us. And if you remember correctly, we looked at the soil biodiversity in just a non-native lawn area. We took our sample right outside over off of the parking lot. We also took a sample down in the stormwater management, kind of that bioswale area. And then we took a sample over in the riparian rights, which was the stream. I know this lab was really rushed, so I apologize for that, and we're going to go through the results that we got at this point. So, the bioswale area we visited during our lab walk around. It's the area that captures the runoff from the parking lots and other buildings on campus. So as you can imagine, it often has more moisture. It really has a lot of native plants from the area, and a lot of organisms live there. You remember seeing lots of plants, lots of insects, but there was also a lot of things living in the stormwater or in the soil. And a lot of those things that we see are what we call macro invertebrates and different things like that. This is what the soil looked like. And as you look down in here, you can see that it's dried out significantly from when we began. We'll take some closer looks at these things. These are some of the invertebrates, and you can see just exactly how many holding up here in this area. As you look here, here's a little closer up look at some of the different organisms and insects that were caught there. So you can see this was probably the most biodiverse that we had, just based on looking at all of the organisms that we've seen, the plants, the flowers, as well as everything that we got out of the soil. Now, some of the things that we also had that kind of came through looking through some of these, we also had some microinvertebrates. They're a little more difficult to see. They would be down in here in the bottom. A lot of them look like specks of dust in there, and we really don't have a great picture of them. But there were a lot of just little microinvertebrates, and what they do is they make their way down through this soil, and they fall through the screen and down into here to be preserved. So all in all, this had the most biodiversity of anything that we had. All right, so as we move on to the next one, which would be the lawn, and this was a non-native area, so some things to keep in mind is that this ecosystem is heavily managed. It's mowed, walked over frequently, fertilized, and gets frequent disruptions. The ground on the day of the sampling, if you remember, was very hard, and the soil appeared very dry and hard at that point. And that held true as we kind of look. You can see there's a lot of organic material in here. And again, it's non-native grasses, so we have to keep that in mind. You can see everything that was there with it. Now, some of the insects that we would see here, some invertebrate insects and vertebrate insects as well. But a lot of these invertebrates, grasshopper in there and some other things. We see some larger organisms that are there. But again, because of a lot of the disruptions, we're not going to see a lot in there. And looking back into down here, there's not a lot in the jar as far as microinvertebrates either. So not a lot living here, yet there's still some things that are going to live in this soil, but they're probably going to be down a little further because of all the frequent disruptions. So the third thing that we looked at was the creek bed or the riparian soil. They can vary. We sampled the creek over by the parking lot. So there's some potential for things there to be a little bit different. Pollutants, certainly with runoff from the parking lots and things like that. Frequent disruptions, because and the frequent disruptions could be heavy flow or drought conditions, but also You can have more animals walking through, people walking through, things like that. Now, this one was just off the bridge, probably doesn't get a lot of that, but you're not going to see a lot of the other insects and things like that as much because there's so much going on around the area. It's a very busy area. When we looked at some of those different areas, you looked at the soil, you can see the soil kind of has a darker contrast, probably has more minerals in it, more nutrients, things like that, just because the water is going to settle out and those minerals will be left behind. You can look down in here and you can see some of these microinvertebrates that are down there. You can get a good look at some of the dirt here from the top and how it breaks down. Looks a little bit different. Not as much organic material. These are roots that are in here, but not a lot of parent material or organic material on the top of the soil. When we look at some of the invertebrates that are in there, we have some different just water organisms that you might see there and different things like that. So still have quite a few organisms, some larger invertebrates that live there. And we call this kind of a riparian area, but it's really not native either. And none of the three, even though we planted native grasses, there was not a lot of organisms that were native to the area. We did remember seeing some of those, but the riparian organisms are just going to be some of your basic organisms that you would see every day in different things like that. So you're going to, and in your lab manual, you should be able to identify some of these other organisms that we have, but just kind of taking a look at some of them. I know some of the ones that we found, specifically some of the things that we observed and some of the things that we found, we kind of identified, in this riparian area. If you remember what we seen, we see just the insects that are here that are not going to be, probably all that much. We're probably going to see maybe, it's possible we're going to see some water pennies, springtails, stone flies, different things like that we're going to see, to some of the stream things that you might see. You might even have, I didn't see any at this one, but some other things you would see would be some snails, things like that you would see there in the riparian area, which are some of the same things that we will look at when we looked at the stream assessments. So, in the organisms that as we go back and we would see in the lawn, we seen grasshoppers and we seen those things in there. As we go back to the bioswale, if you remember, this is where we might see some springtails. You might see some stoneflies, mayflies, water pennies occasionally that you're going to see in here. So just some things like that you would see. We didn't notice any larvas that I seen in particularly, but then also notice we seen bees with the flowers and things like that. So hopefully this kind of sums up a little bit better some of the things that we've seen with the soil biodiversity. I will see you this evening if you have any questions. Thank you. So, overall, I'm sorry. On our site visit, we note that the stormwater area was vibrant with biodiversity. I want you to, if you choose to do so, think about why that might be. There are factors, the non-native lawns, the creek beds, frequent disruptions, and human activity have altered that biodiversity. So just some things to think about as we conclude this assignment.